February 2014. Thousands of people around the world open their accounts. They try to withdraw their money. They try to sell. They try to do anything. But something isn't responding. The platform isn't loading correctly. Transactions are frozen. And then, without warning, everything disappears. Mt.GOX goes offline. No immediate explanation. No answers. Just silence. And a number that starts circulating in forums, chats, and news feeds. 850,000 Bitcoin. Gone. No clear trail. No confirmed culprits. No single narrative. No one knows exactly what happened. For the users, this wasn't just digital money. It was savings, investments, in some cases entire fortunes. And in a matter of days, everything became inaccessible. But the most unsettling thing wasn't the loss. It was the uncertainty. Because no one knew if it was an external hack, a technical failure, or something darker. The origin to understand how it happened, you have to go back. Before the collapse. Before the chaos. When everything seemed to be just beginning. Bitcoin was practically unknown. An experiment. An idea born after the global financial crisis. An alternative. Decentralized. Without banks. Without intermediaries. But there was a problem. Buying and selling Bitcoin wasn't simple. There was no infrastructure. No reliable platforms. And that's where Mt.GOX comes in. Originally, it wasn't even designed for Bitcoin. The name comes from Magic, the gathering online exchange. A site for trading game cards. But its creator, Jed McCaleb, saw an opportunity. He transformed the platform into a Bitcoin exchange. A place where people could buy and sell. And at the time, that was revolutionary. In 2011, McCaleb sold the platform to Mark Karpelès, a French developer based in Japan. Karpelès wasn't a banker. Wasn't a traditional executive. But now he was in charge of something growing rapidly. Very rapidly. By 2013, Mt.GOX was processing more than 70% of all Bitcoin transactions in the world. It was the center of the ecosystem. The platform became synonymous with Bitcoin. And that position generated something powerful: trust. Massive. Global. But it also generated something dangerous: concentration. Millions of users trusted a single point. A single system. A single company. To store and manage assets that, in theory, were designed to be decentralized. That contradiction was invisible to most. Because while it worked, no one questioned the structure. The chaotic growth, the growth was chaotic. Users entering constantly. Volume increasing. Prices rising. Bitcoin went from being a curiosity to an asset with real value. And Mt.GOX was at the center of everything. But internally, something wasn't right. The system wasn't prepared for that level of growth. Frequent technical problems. Withdrawal delays. Balance errors. Small signals that in retrospect were warnings. But at the time, they seemed like temporary glitches. Nothing structural. Nothing critical. Not yet. The illusion was strong. Users saw their balances. Saw their Bitcoin. Saw growth. But they didn't know what was happening behind the scenes. Because there was no transparency. No clear audits. No solid controls. It was a black box. And everyone trusted that it worked. The gradual disappearance. The problem had been underway for years before the final collapse. Bitcoin began to disappear. Gradually. Without being fully detected. Without triggering immediate alarm. Small amounts. Then larger ones, but never enough to trigger an immediate response. Because the system wasn't designed to detect losses of that kind. Or it wasn't doing so correctly. One of the most discussed theories involves a technical vulnerability, something called transaction malleability. You don't need to understand the technical detail. What matters is this: there was a vulnerability that allowed manipulation of how certain transactions were recorded. And that could create confusion in the system. Enough confusion to hide losses. For a long time. But that's only one version. Because there's another possibility. A more uncomfortable one. That it wasn't just a technical error. But negligence. Or even fraud. And that's where the mystery deepens. Because there was never a completely definitive answer. No one knows exactly what happened. As the years passed, the losses accumulated. But they weren't visible to users. Because balances kept showing positive numbers. Everything seemed normal. Until it didn't. After the collapse by early 2014, the problems were already evident. Withdrawals were being delayed. Complaints were increasing. Forums were filling with worried users. Something wasn't adding up. But there was still no clarity. Only suspicions. Then came the breaking point. Mt.GOX suspended Bitcoin withdrawals. Officially, due to technical problems. Unofficially, because they could no longer deliver. The system was empty. Or at least far emptier than it should have been. Trust evaporated. Quickly. Users trying to withdraw en masse. But there wasn't enough for everyone. Because the Bitcoin was no longer there. It had disappeared. Over years. Without the system reflecting it correctly. On February 24, 2014, Mt.GOX shut down its site. Without clear prior warning. Without a full explanation. Just silence. And panic. Days later, the company filed for bankruptcy. Approximately 850,000 Bitcoin were lost. At the time, hundreds of millions of dollars. Today, billions. One of the largest losses in the history of cryptocurrency. By the mystery that remains, but the collapse didn't resolve the mystery. It amplified it. Later investigations managed to recover a portion. Around 200,000 Bitcoin were found in a forgotten wallet. But that only made the situation stranger. How could funds appear after disappearing? Mark Karpelès was arrested in Japan in 2015. Charged with data manipulation and embezzlement. But the case didn't fully resolve the origin of the losses. He was convicted of falsifying records but not of having directly stolen the funds. Which leaves a gray area. An incomplete narrative. Some believe it was a prolonged hack. Others that it was extreme negligence. Others that there were elements of fraud. And possibly the truth includes parts of all of them. But what is clear is this: the system failed for years without anyone stopping it. Because the signals were small, diffuse, easy to ignore, until they became impossible to hide. 850,000 Bitcoin don't disappear in a single day. They disappear gradually, silently, until the system can no longer sustain the illusion. The system, the impact was immediate. Bitcoin fell in price. Confidence in exchanges collapsed. The entire ecosystem was questioned. Because if the largest platform could fail like this, what guaranteed others wouldn't? But it also generated change. Exchanges began improving security. Implementing audits. Separating client funds. The concept of not your keys, not your coins began to gain relevance. Because the problem wasn't Bitcoin itself. It was custody. Mt.GOX revealed a fundamental contradiction. A system designed to eliminate intermediaries. Depended on intermediaries. And those intermediaries could fail. Like any traditional institution. Or worse, this wasn't just an exchange collapsing. It was a warning. About trust. About concentration. About systems that seem safe. Until they don't. Today, the case is still being analyzed. Discussed. Debated. But never completely resolved. Because there is no single narrative. Only fragments. Theories. Partial reconstructions. And that's the most unsettling part. Because in a financial system, uncertainty is more dangerous than loss. Because it means the risk was not understood. And what isn't understood can repeat itself. Mt.GOX was not the end. It was the beginning of a lesson about how even new systems can replicate old errors. Concentration, lack of control, blind trust. The money disappeared, but the question remains open. And as long as it remains open, so does the risk.